Do you want to break into the comic book industry as a writer? In this video, I interview a successful comic book industry writer named Doug Wagner, who has not only written Batman for DC Comics and Plastic for Image Comics, but also has a new graphic novel coming out. It's called Yumi, Spy Fatale, Battle Royale. In fact, at this very moment, it's funding on Kickstarter. There's only a few days left, so I encourage you to click the link in the description below and join me in backing Doug's campaign. Without further ado, here is my interview with Doug Wagner. Doug.
Angelo, how you doing today, man?
I am doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Just a normal day.
It is great to see you. Thank you for coming on. Thanks for taking the time. I'm just curious, how did you find out you wanted to be a writer? How did you get started? You started out with Dynamite. You progressed through DC and Image and where you are now, and now you look like you're working on a movie. So, what has that journey been like for you? Where did you start? Can you help the folks at home who are new?
Yeah, I started back. I realized I wanted to be a comic book writer back when I was 17.
Wow.
I can still remember that day because it kind of just dawned on me that I was already doing it. And I was best friends with Cully Hamner back in high school, the artist. And basically he and I had been kind of creating comic books together in high school. And it didn't dawn on me, for several months that actually I was writing books. And so that's when I decided I wanted to be a comic book writer. That realization, and then talking to your parents about, hey, I want to be a writer. And they're like, yeah, that's a bad idea. Because it is definitely one of the harder careers to try to, pursue. And, from that point forward, it was just like trying to figure out, like writing, putting together pitches. This was obviously, I'm a little bit older, so this was before the internet. So you actually had to send in physical, pitches yourself, like, something you put together at Kinko's, like nice copies, that kind of stuff. And, you got rejection letters back, that was part of the game. And so it took me till I was about 25, 26 until I got my first break. And that was actually with Malibu Comics. And they had purchased a concept that it was going to be a brand new comic book coming out from them, from Cully Hamner and I. And in the meantime, they were going to let me write a couple of issues of Ultra Force. And I got to write one issue of Ultra Force, and then Marvel bought Malibu and shut them down. So I got to start from scratch because now I had no you're basically like, okay, well, now I got to start pitching. I've only written one comic book. And it was just like you're back to square one. And it took probably about 6 or 7 years before I got sick of that and just decided I was going to start publishing my own stuff. And so that was the first issue of The Ride. Like Kevin Gardner and I got together and decided we were going to just put our own book together. We were tired of talking about it, just wanted to do it. And pitched it to Image. Luckily, Image picked it up. And, that kind of started that game down that road of like, okay, well, I did The Ride, I did Gun Candy, and then DC Comics called and started offering me DC custom work. So World of Warcraft, Bloodsworn graphic novel, Legends of the Dark Knight, just started getting work because I was doing regular work. I worked with the Arrow, Flash, and Person of Interest TV shows doing some of their social media comic books. And, that all just kind of snowballed into doing a lot of stuff for DC Custom there for a while, which got me, I got lucky enough to write a couple Batman books there. So that was awesome. And then since then, dude, most of it's just been like putting my own books together. I'm really into the creator own thing. And, that's what's kind of led me down the road of doing so many Image books like Plastic and The Hard Place. And again, we did The Ride, I think 2 years ago. Got a new one coming out in June from Image. And so that's, it's a long road. And I'll say, I think the only reason I made it was because I refused to give up. It's just like being hard headed. Like I said, I got my first break when I was 25, then got the rug pulled out from under me. And then it took me 8 years to come to the realization that really the only way to break into comics is to just start doing them.
Now I'm curious, what is that new Image comic you got coming out?
Well, I can't give any details yet because it hasn't been announced. But it's in the same universe as Plastic. How about that?
All right, hey, that's fair enough. I'm not going to ask you to tell me. I'll let you keep your secrets. I know how it is. So you have started out with a setback, but even in your setback, you were far ahead than most people. I mean, that's just a matter of fact. So the fact that you're a testament of keeping plugging away is, I think, something that is important for viewers to need to hear. And what's interesting about what you've been through is you're a combination of the creator-owned thing, but you've also experienced the freelance life. You know, being a freelance writer, and frankly, those are two pieces of knowledge. Those are two pieces of your experience with. Either way, people don't know too much about.
Right.
So, you know, the other day I talked a little bit. I had an interview with the founder of Action Lab, and he was telling me about the pitch process. And he was, you could pull it up in my old YouTube video. He was actually pulling up his pitches and the pitches he does now, and how you know, how thorough they are and beautiful they are. So he was giving me a sense of the pitch process, and I do want to touch base on you about that. But I think one thing that new writers don't know is, you know, the actual business of being a freelancer and a writer. You know, basic questions like, how does that process work? Finding work, how much do you charge? You know, when you know, if I'm DC Comics and I come calling you, you know, what is that conversation like? Is that conversation like, Doug, I need you to, we have a slot of 3 months. We need 3 Batman stories, and that became the Ashes to Ashes. So just as a freelance writer, you know, even payment, you know, obviously there's a range that people are paid, but you know, what does that look like to complete to people at home who to that is, you know, very new to them?
Yeah. I mean, you know, if a company comes to you, which is like if Marvel and DC, most of the time that's the way it's going to happen. It's rare, you know, they don't take unsolicited pitches anymore. So if you want to get into Marvel and DC, they kind of have to come to you. So that's why I'd always recommend self-publishing first to kind of get their attention. Yeah, they're going to come to you and they're going to say, you know, here's what we're thinking. You know, maybe it's 3 issues, maybe it's 6 issues of something, and a lot of times you're going to have to try out for it. So you're like, hey, I've got Angelo, I've got Doug, I've got Cully, I've got Scott Snyder, I've got Jeff Johns, and they're all putting a pitch together for this 6 issues of Batman. Mm. So put together a pitch. We need it by tomorrow, and you know, we're going to pick our favorite.
Wow.
And yeah, and so you know, sometimes you get
no
a week.
Pressure.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no pressure at all. So yeah, I mean, you throw it out there and you see if they nibble on it, and then they, you know, they'll be like, okay, well, we want to do, you know, we want yours. And you know, a lot of times money really doesn't come into the conversation too early. It's usually fairly deep into it, because they're like, if you're working for Marvel or DC, they kind of understand that like you're playing with the big boys, and what your rate is what your rate is. There's not really a whole lot of negotiation there. It's going to be per page. And usually with Marvel and DC, it's going to be somewhere between 75 to 150 per page. Huh. It's going to depend on experience and those kind of things. And you know, I mean, you never know what your schedule is going to be. A lot of times when you're working freelance, you might not even know who your artist is going to be until after you turn in your scripts and stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. So you know, it's I don't know, that those process, and they're all different. I mean, each process is unique. You know, I've been paid $10 a page.
Wow.
To $150 a page. So it just really depends on the project and what the budget is for the book, and you know what your level of experience is. Yeah, I mean, there's so much involved in that. You know, and it's, you know, if you go with the Ashes to Ashes thing, they kind of approached me and were like, hey, we'd like you to do a Legends of the Dark Knight. Here's, you know, the basics of it's going to be this many pages, broken into 3 separate, you know, little mini stories, and you get your standard rate. You know, there's no discussion or negotiation there, even if it's Batman. And basically they're like, okay, well, we need you know, for that one, they were like, right, we need a pitch by the end of the week. And if you decide to take it, then we'll need a script 2 weeks after that, and then 2 weeks after that, and then 2 weeks after that. And so, you know, you throw them your pitch, they send you notes, you know, and then you start working on a script. And I had no clue who the artist was going to be. Any of that, you know, I had no contact with anybody other than the editor on that book.
Wow. And I imagine, was it a similar situation for when you did Red Sonja for Dynamite?
Yes, with Red Sonja, they contacted me because at that point, Dynamite and Top Cow still had a contract together, and they had one more crossover that they were contractually obligated to do. And so Dynamite was leading the charge on that one. That was Joe and Nick over at Dynamite. And basically, they just called up, and initially, it was actually Ron Mars and I were co-writing it together. And then basically, they just, Nick called me one day and said, "Hey, like the budget can't handle both, two writers, so we're just going to go with one right now." And at that point, Ron did kind of step to the side, and started working. Just started working on that one. That was tougher because then you've got two companies, so you have two editors, and so they're both kind of trying to protect their character, and so they wanted to make sure that the story didn't step on anybody's toes.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Now, I'm just curious about the freelance. Let's say average comic is 24 pages a month, and then let's say you're charging, I don't know, $100 a page. That would be for the month $2,400, which to some people that might be good, that might be not good. So, but to compensate for that, I'm sure that the schedule probably allows you to be able to write more than one issue a month, or am I wrong?
Well, usually if you're on a book, say, let's just take, Batman, for instance, like they're only going to pay you for one book a month. For Batman, you only get paid that once a month. The thing to remember when you're a freelancer is there's no taxes.
Yes.
There's no health care. There's none of that stuff taken out. So really, when you get that $2,400, you get to keep about 65% of that. So the rest of it you need to put aside just for taxes.
Wow. Now, so especially for a writer starting out, you would recommend to still have a day job. Like the founder of Action Lab that I just talked to, he still has his day job. He went back to working on creator-owned stuff because he missed it. And he decided to just keep his day job and keep plugging away. So is that your situation? Was that your situation? Is that something you recommend?
Oh yeah, that's definitely was my situation. It isn't currently, but it was there for many, many years. It's tough. I won't lie. Like, I don't think most people get into comics for the money. They get into comics because they love comics. You're going to hear that a lot. There's not a lot of money in comics. There's some people that make a good living at it. There's the top of the game guys. Cates and Snyder probably make a really good living doing comics. But I'll tell you, like, from the last survey I saw, 50% of all creatives in comics have a day job. That includes artists. So 50%.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, now whether that's 40 hours a week or 30 hours a week or 15 hours a week, it's just something that you can kind of keep that money flowing in on a regular basis. And definitely when you're starting out, that's probably going to be the case. You're probably going to have a side job. But I think a lot of people let that get in their head. Like they're like, "Oh, I'm working at, Publix grocery store," and they get their identity and their ego caught up in the fact that they're working at Publix, when they need to change their mindset. Because if you're creative, that kind of job is nothing more than a tool. It's a writing tool. It's a tool for you to pay your bills while you're writing. So you got to kind of switch that mindset a little bit, not like get caught up in like, "Oh, well, I work at Publix and I write on the side." No, you write and work at Publix on the side.
That's a good way to look at it. I can appreciate that. I've been working professionally as a computer animator for over 10 years now. I am employed full time with a multi-award-winning company headquartered near Philadelphia. So I'm lucky enough that I'm still a full-time artist, doing very good animation work. Not everybody's that lucky, especially if you're in the comic book industry. So I'm curious. So when you started the whole creator-owned journey, what was that like for you? I'm sorry, what did you say your first creator-owned was?
The Ride.
The Ride, okay.
Yeah.
And how did that? So you started self-publishing, and how did that come together? How did that particular book come together? And also, something that the folks at home probably aren't too aware of is pitching and submitting and putting a team together. And one thing that kind of blows my mind a little bit is unless the comic book is already done and submitted to, for publication, you're putting in that time. It's another job you're doing, trying to put out that comic book every single month. And you're responsible for meeting your own living needs. So
Yeah.
is that a correct assessment or no?
Oh yeah, no, that's definitely a correct assessment. Like, I mean, it's tough. I mean, creator-owned stuff, I love because I get to work really close with my team, and a lot of times I get to pick my own team. So, say the ride, when Kevin and I first got together to kind of put that together, and Kevin Gardner's the president of 12 Gauge Comics.
Okay.
He and we knew some people. So, I'd known Cully from high school. Cully was in the studio with Brian Stelfreeze, so I'd known Brian Stelfreeze for a while. He was also in the studio with Georges Genty and Jason Pearson. And so we reached out to those guys going, hey, we're going to do a comic. Do you guys think you can do like at least 11 pages? And we'll do it in like 11-page chapters. And so we were able to put this team together and then you got to figure out like, well, okay, I've got this artist. All four of those guys, including Dexter Vines, who was the inker on Georges Genty, they're used to getting paid. So before you even have an idea of where it's going to be published, you're already paying people. And that's coming out of your pocket.
Wow.
So whether you got to kind of go, what was the movie they shot on the cams? The horror movie, Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
They funded Blair Witch Project on credit cards. So what are you willing to invest in this comic? Is this comic good enough for you to spend 20 grand on? Up front, not knowing whether you're going to get that money back or not. So there's a lot of things you have to keep in mind when you start thinking about that. It's like, okay, well, I've got to put this team together. What's my budget going to be? How much am I willing to spend on this idea that I've come up with? And, then it kind of starts hitting you like, do I think I want to sell enough to make this money back? Because if you don't believe in the book, you definitely don't want to spend 20 grand, right? Like, it's like you want to start throwing out money on something you don't believe that we're going to return that back to you. And so, we're paying people even before we've pitched it, because we have to have pages to show. Image will not even look at a pitch that doesn't have 5 completed pages. And that's written, penciled, inked, colored, and lettered. So there's at least 3 people you're going to have to pay down that path. And, go ahead. I can tell you got a question.
No, just 20 grand is that's a reasonable figure.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Easy. Yep.
Sorry, I'm just blown away. I'm sure there's people at home going, wow, I gotta set aside 20 grand to pitch a comic book to Image Comics or other publishers. I mean, most the guy at Publix, I don't know if the guy at Publix is going to be able to handle that.
Yeah.
But that's just a brutal reality of the situation.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to get what you pay for. So if you find an artist that works for free and a colorist that works for free and a letterer that works for free, I hate to put it this way, but there's a good chance your book's not going to look good and nobody's going to buy it. I mean, I'm just being honest. It's if you need professionals to pull all that stuff together. And I've had more than one discussion with fellow creatives where people wouldn't even pay a letterer to letter their book. And letterers are usually $10 to $15 a page for the best. If you're not willing to throw down $250 to have your book lettered, you don't believe in your project. Like that's just plain. I mean, if you're not willing to throw that on a credit card to pay to have professionally lettered, you're not taking it serious, and nobody's going to take you serious. Like you said, we're talking about hard truths here, right? It's like, it's like, I mean, if you can figure out how to letter it yourself and make it look great, that's fantastic. But I'm sure you've seen the same thing I've seen. When a book's lettered badly, it hurts the book.
Yeah, I mean, the text is what people are reading, so if it doesn't look good, it does not bode well. So I mean, that makes complete sense. I'm sorry. I'm sure, like many others, the 20 grand is just definitely getting. And the truth is, that's probably on the moderate side.
Yeah. Well, let me hold on a second. I'm gonna pull up my calculator and just kind of like do a quick.
Oh, please do. Take your time.
Calculator. Let's see. So we got the average comic is 22 pages. I'm gonna say we're gonna get away with doing $300 a page. So for the first issue, if you can all in $300 a page, you're looking at $6,600. That's for one issue. So,
Wow.
then you got to start thinking like, how many issues is this going to be? It's going to be 4 issues, because if 4 issues, 4 times 6, there you go. Like you're already in the range we're talking about, right? And $300 a page is cheap. That means you found some guys that are kind of giving you a break, and so yeah, I mean that's what you're talking about, just to throw down on, say, 4 or 5 issues. And honestly, I mean, I do that now on a regular basis. So it doesn't, I know I can tell, like, in your head, just by your eyes, like you're like, man, 20 grand sounds like a lot of money. And for me, I've become so accustomed to doing it that 20 grand is like that's going to be like your baseline budget. And so I take everything into consideration when I'm doing that, right? Like I have to go, okay, what am I going to pay Angelo? What am I going to play Frank? What am I going to play Ed? To like do all these pieces. Do I believe enough in the concept that I'm giving to Angelo that I'm willing to put 20 grand on the table? And do I think I can get that back?
That is definitely the height of putting your money where your mouth is.
Right.
That's absolutely. But so to me, I'm just thinking about the math of it. So for example, I'm pulling up your Yumi Kickstarter, and the goal was $12,000, and if I heard correctly, what was the page count on that?
Oh, the page count on that is 100. I think the total was 114 story pages.
So.
Yep.
I'm sorry to say this, but is Kickstarter, is that gonna make your money back? I feel sorry to say that, but that just feels like the math doesn't work for me. Am I miscalculating somewhere?
Oh no, it's you got to think, like, if you listen to some of the other things that Hoyt and I've said, Hoyt and I did that book for free. So Hoyt came in, and when he did get paid, he got paid just a little bit. The colorist cut us a deal. We didn't get a deal on the letterer, but I never worry about it. Letterers get paid so little, I don't worry about cutting them, getting the deal from them. Our main point with the Kickstarter was to get the book printed so that we have physical copies in our hand. And so we're looking at the long-term goal of that. What we figured out between Hoyt and I and Kevin, if we could hit the 20,000 mark, we're actually back to zero. Everybody that had gotten paid will have recovered all of our money back. That's without, like I said, that's without 12 Gauge getting any money. That's without Doug getting any money. That gets us back to zero. But now we have several copies of a book that we can sell.
So the point of Kickstarter, for the folks at home, is that you're looking to fund the print run. And yes. So what you're seeing there is, for example, how many copies do you expect to print?
Well, you have to print 500 minimum of a soft cover or hardcover. Yep.
So, I've heard other people say 1,000. So if you're looking to sell 1,000, print 1,000 with that, over 12 grand you've hit, then and you're going to sell each of those books at what?
Oh, the soft cover's $30 and the hardcover's $50.
So let me just round it to $40. So if you're going to sell 1,000 of those, that could be 40 grand in sales, which therefore is pretty decent.
Oh yeah.
If you can sell out, all 1,000 of those copies, that's pretty decent money.
Yep.
And that's where the profitability comes in.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's, we're not, we didn't think when we did this, we're going to have we're going to be making 100 grand each kind of thing. It's we know how comics work. And that, that the Kickstarter was like, if we could hit 12, that pays our printing bill. That also pays like the graphic designer bill and some of the marketing bills that we had. Anything past that goes towards paying the creative people that we did hire, like the colorists and the letterer and that kind of thing. So we can get back to, the goal there is, if we can get back to zero, we have produced a book for free. We haven't made any money, but we haven't lost any money. And so that's what we're hoping for.
I can appreciate that. Wow. So I'm curious for new writers, as far as trying to learn the actual mechanics of story, and actually trying to learn the mechanics of storytelling with comic, because I know you also do screenwriting. I'm curious, how you've what your transition into that has been like. But what were there any? I know for me, there was probably a few key moments in just reading about writing in general and about storytelling that I got it. I understand now how storytelling properly works. Were there any moments in your experience that you sort of figured, what was it that helped you figure out the mechanics of dialogue, of plotting, and of everything?
Honestly, a lot of that is just years of experience of talking like we're doing now, and getting deep into like how stories work, what we like about stories, what we don't like about stories, because everybody's going to have a different opinion. Um, for me, there's some key books. So like Sid Field's screenplay book is, if you want to learn the basics of three-act structure, which everybody should know, that's a key book. Journey of a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell's
Yes.
storybook. There's Robert McKee story. That one's really, really thick and dense. So you need to know, you need to have an understanding of story before you dive into that book. That's definitely more advanced storytelling. And then obviously throughout the years, there's all kinds of things on web. Like Pixar has their little story sheet that they use. You can dive into that. Who's the is it Blake Snyder, the guy that
That sounds about right.
it's the cat books.
Save the Cat.
Save the Cat. Yep. Those are good books to read, because all of those are going to give you kind of like the basics of how Hollywood wants you to write a story, but they're the basics of how to write every story. And then you've got to figure out what your voice looks like in that format. And so for me, it was just like constantly, I mean, obviously, I'm sure you heard the 10,000 hours theory, and so if you apply the 10,000 hours theory, you've got to practice 10,000 hours of something before you become good at it. Not great, good at it. The biggest lesson you can learn is to write constantly, get your 10,000 hours in, and be willing to share it with people so that they can tell you what's good and bad about it.
I think I find it interesting that so many writers I've heard over the years don't want to share their work because they're embarrassed. I hear that it's like the classic writer, oh, don't look at my writing. But I think it's important to have that opposite mentality. No, please look at it and tell me what's wrong with it and how I can fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how to improve. That constant need for improvement. So I think that's perfect. So now I'm curious what your venture into screenwriting, because I heard that there are some writers who comic book writers, all they want to do is comic books, and that's their love, and that's great, and I totally respect that. Then there's others who go into novel writing, and then there's others who go into screenwriting and game writing. I hear is also something. So and I'm curious, do you see that for yourself, or is that something you see for others to have like a spectrum of writing and storytelling products or vehicles that you pursue, or maybe that you could talk about it for yourself or talk about what you've seen?
Yeah, the biggest one piece of advice I'd give you for any creative is to work on what you love working on. Period. If the story is something that you put together that you love, somebody else will love it. If you love doing screenplays, write screenplays. If you love comics, write comics. You have to love what you're working on, because writing in all the creative fields are hard. They can drain your soul of happiness, and because it's a difficult career path to walk down. So for me, my true love will always be comics. I love writing comics at 17. That's all I wanted to do. But I also love movies and TV. That's like a big part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to write that, but I will never stop writing comics. The comics will always be like my first love, and that's what I want to work on. But I also kind of want to, I want to try this screenwriting thing and see if I can write a decent movie or TV show. I mean, I love writing, and it's the screenplay format isn't that different visually. It's still a visual medium, so it fits in that comic book realm.
Yeah.
And so, I'm not saying I'll necessarily be successful at it, but I'm going to give it my best and see if there's some way like I can, because I'm used to writing still pictures. So, getting into the moving picture thing is a whole new ball game, and I can't wait to see how that turns out. Now, I hear what you're saying as far as like, should they have a backup or should they dabble in other things? Only if you love it. I mean, that's, I've taught a couple of classes on writing, and it always comes down to like, are you working in the medium that you love? That's if 5 years from now you could say only one of those things came true, are you working in the one that you love? Because again, like if you don't love what you're putting out, nobody else is either. I mean, that's, the funny thing is I've run into a lot of creatives, especially in comics, who are like, well, I'm better than DC's worst artist. I'm better than DC's worst writer. And DC's not looking to replace their worst writer. They're looking for somebody that's going to knock their socks off. So if you're writing stuff that's just as bad as DC's worst book or Marvel's worst book, they're not going to hire you. Like that's not who they're looking for.
You know what? I was going to ask you another question, but you kind of touch on not a sensitive subject,
Oh, yeah.
but just something I've heard is, you've heard, I'm sure you've heard many people online, comment on stuff they hear. Even Todd McFarlane famously said, "I can draw crooked noses. I can do that." So, how should somebody, a writer especially, internalize that when they see something that they believe they can do at a higher quality? What do you do with that? How do you interpret that? Should I be, telling DC, you might want to come to me, sir? What do you do with that when you realize that you can do better?
Prove it.
Prove it.
You have to prove it. I mean, freelance lifestyle honestly isn't that much different. And I'm going to go into sports here a little bit. Isn't that much different than like football or baseball? You want somebody spot on the team, you got to prove you're better than them. You just can't say it, right? You can't go, well, I can throw the ball better than Tom Brady, but can you throw the ball better than Tom Brady in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs? Prove it. Get on the field and prove it. And I know that's like, well, how do I prove that I can write Captain America better than the current Captain America writer? Start writing your own stuff and put it online. There's nothing stopping you from creating your own comic books. You can put scripts up, you can put stories up and say, here's my thing, take a look at it and see what you think. You have to prove it. Because the difference between somebody who hasn't gotten in yet and somebody who is that even if you take a writer you do not like, they have proven to the industry that they can deliver a comic book in a month. You don't have that on your resume yet. So who's an editor going to go to? Their job's on the line. You have to kind of look at it from the editor's viewpoint a lot of times too. It's like, what is this editor going to pick? Like, are they going to pick somebody they know, somebody they trust? Or are they going to pick somebody that says they can do it?
That's a fair point. I think that's probably the best piece of advice I could have ever gotten for such a question. Prove it. That makes complete sense. Now, funny enough, you do touch upon being able to complete a book and get out a book a month, and that's something people who don't have that job don't know or don't expect. I remember I was listening to one writer recently, talking about writer's block. He said he doesn't have to deal with writer's block because he's writing so many books in advance. It's not even an issue. And then I saw a documentary about one particular writer. I won't say his name, and this guy had writer's block for months on a mainstream title in front of the world. He had writer's block.
Right.
I won't say who it was, and it blew my mind. And then, funny enough, I just did a video on how to defeat writer's block, 4 tips. So I'm curious, what is just for somebody who's never experienced that, what is the expectation when writing a comic, especially? I guess if you're on an ongoing series and it's your run, what is that like? Trying to fill that month after month after month after month. What is that like?
Yeah, I mean, it is, there's no lie that it is stressful, but it's also the dream job. For me, it's like, I can get caught up in my headspace of like, man, I'm not doing a good job today, or this particular issue isn't my best. But I have to keep in mind, like I'm working on something that I love. Like this is my dream job. There's a lot of stressors because there's a chance like you're going to get kickbacks on your script. Anywhere from up. I've had a script kicked back to me 9 times and said you need to rewrite this.
Wow.
And so that's in 1 month. So, you got to be prepared for that. Turn your stuff in early. Don't wait to the last second because they will find somebody else that can. There's plenty of other people, I mean, what would you suspect? Like there's probably 100 to 200 paying gigs in comics for writers, and keep in mind, like somebody like Mark Waid or Scott Snyder or Jeff Lemire, they can write 4 or 5 of those. So there's really maybe 50 to 75 openings on any given day. And how many people want that job? 10,000? Like
Like sports.
Yeah. So your competition is fierce. And so there's a lot of stress for you to deliver on time and be communicative with your editor and let them know what's going on. So if you have writer's block, you just say, hey, I'm struggling. And maybe they can help you out. Maybe they can watch Angelo's video on how to break writer's block. Or, you've got to figure out what works for you to kind of help get your mind in the right spot so that you can sit down and write. And that'll never go away. That fight will never go away. It'll continually evolve to where, like, listening to Billie Eilish this week got me in the right mood to write this particular song. I mean, this particular issue, right? But I try it next month and it doesn't work. So now what? So you've got to come up with like a parade of things to throw at yourself to try to help you get out of writer's block because the deadline's not getting moved. And if you're not turning in your deadlines for like Marvel or for a monthly ongoing book that's already been scheduled, they will find somebody that can.
I can appreciate that. Now, just forgive me for my ignorance. I know you. I know a little bit about your work. Have you ever done an ongoing?
I haven't done an ongoing. No.
Okay. Now, but an ongoing. I'm curious why. I don't know if this is a dumb question, but why is it called a run? What does that mean? Is it basically, what do you have, like a staff writer and they have a run on, I don't know, Superman. They have a run on Superman, and then at some point editorial says to them, all right, we really need you to go work on Green Lantern or Batman or some other high selling title. And then they have a run on there. And I don't know how much choice the writer has, they end abruptly. Personally, I've and I know the same thing happens with artists, and all of a sudden an artist will change and I'll feel like, the next issue, I can't get into it. So I'm curious, what is the whole concept of run and how that works?
Well, a run would be like Marvel comes to you and they say, listen, we want to hire you to write 6 issues of Daredevil.
Okay.
And so they're going to come to you and say, we have this many in mind.
It's finite. Okay.
Yep. And so, but it can become a little bit less strict when you're talking. You're like, well, listen, if I'm going to give up writing this other book to write Daredevil, I'm going to need you to give me 12, or I want to write it for a couple of years. I want to write it for 3 or 4 years. And so, all that stuff is negotiable. The downside to it is, and you've seen this happen even recently, the book's not selling well enough. So they either pull the book or they pull you off the book. And that can be writer, editor, colorist, anybody on the book. And like, just because you've signed like, hey, I'm going to get 12 issues on Daredevil doesn't mean they're going to let you finish 12 issues of Daredevil, because if it's bad and the book's just not selling, they've got to make a change. And so that run, when you're a freelancer, it's like, yeah, I've been told I'll have 12 issues, but you have to understand that that's like, are you delivering on 12 issues?
I can appreciate that. So I'm curious, let's say I'm a big publisher and I tell you, here, I want a character. And I say, I'm going to give you 12 issues. Well, I'm just curious, you don't have to tell me anything specific, but, speaking of writer's block and how to fill that every month, how would you approach it? Would you approach it on a small story by small story basis? Would you approach it on, I'm going to create what's effectively graphic novel, trade paperback, and tell a complete story and fit that all into 12 months? What do you, or maybe you've seen other approaches that work well. Would you be able to comment on that?
Oh yeah. For me, I would approach it with, I want a beginning, middle, and end. So when you read the last issue of the Daredevil that I've written for the past year, I want you to walk away going, dang, like Doug finished this the right way. Like this impacted me. And so I'm going to think of the full 12 issue arc, beginning, middle, and end, and hope that I'm good enough that in the beginning I can suck you in so that you continue to write, you continue to pick up each issue all the way until I get done. And you are going to have to worry about trades. So, in that case, and let's just go with 4 because it's an easy number to divide by. They're going to say, hey, every 4 issues, you need to come up with some sort of end because we're going to put it in a trade. But you're writing a year. So now I'd have to step back and go, okay, I want 1 through 4 to kind of encapsulate this part of the story. And then the next 4 this, and then the next 4 this. But I want this overarching story to go through all 12 issues. So then, you got to sit down on in front of that table and start, hammering that stuff out and figuring out what you want to do. And again, I'm going to go back to it. Make sure it's a story, no matter how you write it, that you love, that you would want to pick up on the stands. That's what matters.
I think that's great advice. I try to write the way I would want to buy. If I were somebody on the other side reading this thing, would I buy it? And if the answer is not yes, then something needs to change. And I guess my next question is a little bit particular to DC and Marvels of the world, but let's say you have just landed your dream job. Viewer at home, you have we want you to write a 12-month ongoing series for 12 months, and now you have to stand on the shoulders of giants. You have to fill some big shoes.
Oh yeah.
You got to go write Spider-Man, Batman, whatever it is. How do you fill that? How do you approach it? Writer's block is no excuse right now. So, you got to hit it on the first day. How do you approach something like that?
I mean, it's going to be your mind's going to play tricks on you throughout that whole thing, right? So it's one of those deals to where you decide you're going to go out and you're going to ask Jessica Biel out on a date. And she says yes. And then your brain's going to be like, oh my God, I get to go out with Jessica Biel. And then the other part of your brain's going to kick in and go, what are you going to do to impress Jessica Biel? What's this date going to look like? Because you can't mess this up. You got one shot. And so my brain works the same way when I'm getting those kind of ideas. And you're going to have to take a step back and kind of give yourself a day or two to just kind of relax, because it's like, okay, you've got your dream job. It's going to be 12 months. Sit back. Okay, now fall back on, for me, my favorite book of all time was like Chris Claremont's run on Uncanny X-Men. Okay. If they came to me and they said, hey, we want you to write Uncanny X-Men for a year, trying to stand on those shoulders, like you said, is going to really be intimidating to me. It's going to mess with my head. There's no way around it. And you have to realize that's going to happen and just kind of embrace it. And then go back and go, okay, what did I love about Chris Claremont's books? What do I love about the X-Men? And what would make Doug buy the book? Again, falling back to throw all that other stuff to the side, create the book that you would buy off the stands. And so, I always go back to that. Like, if it's not good enough for me to buy, just like you said, if it's not good enough for me to buy, it's not good enough for anybody. So, that's the way I'm going to approach it when I'm creating that. So then I have to really get into that and go, okay, what's the story I want to tell? What's the X-Men story I want to tell? And how can I live up to what others have laid before me?
So research is going to be a huge topic. Reading every single X-Men since the beginning of time, pretty much.
Yeah, I don't know if you have to get into reading every X-Men until the beginning of time. I know there could be some debate on that. I think you have to discover what resonates with you with the X-Men, and what you think that should be in your voice. And I mean, now the downside is you do need to read a lot of the X-Men because you don't want to create another story that's already been done.
Sure.
How many times have all the villains from Arkham Asylum escaped? 3 or 4? It's like, so if you pitch that idea, they're going to be like, yeah, we've done that. We've already done that. What's your different take on that? So yeah, you have to you definitely want to know what's come before you, but I don't think you have to necessarily get overwhelmed with trying to read. I mean, if you try to read all the X-Men comics now, back to the beginning of time, I mean, you're probably talking about 6 months of just doing that. And you don't have that kind of time. You have a script due in a month.
That's fair. I mean, if it were me, I would probably try to hit on some key stories. Now, one thing I do is I've been doing how to write different types of fan fiction. So I have more planned. But even I'm experiencing, wow, I can't read all the Batmans in the world. there's just not enough time. My little girl wants to see me at the end of the day. So,
Right.
you know, how am I going to write it? And it's, you just have to be creative and do something. And the truth is, you know, I don't know if you subscribe to, you know, Joseph Campbell's, you know, ideology, but effectively we've already seen all these stories before. So your own uniqueness is going to override, your own unique take is going to override the fact that we've already seen this before. Just tell it the way you want to tell it.
Right. What's your different view of that? How your perspective in your life add a new balance to that story that we haven't seen before? Because everybody's unique. And so everybody has a different story to tell. No, but you and I are not going to write the same Batman story, even if we were given the same plot. And yeah, I just think you have to jump into that and try to balance it again with like, what do you want to say?
That is completely true. You know, are you familiar with Margaret Atwood?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. She said, you know, if you take a story like Little Red Riding Hood, even that can be made more unique. She said in her master class, what if you started like this? It was dark inside the wolf.
Yeah.
That's just a completely different take on it.
Yep.
So that kind of makes me think about, you know, your own take and your own spin and create your own comics, and how, you know, when you think of create your own comics now, I've learned there's two ways to approach the art market. Approach number one is, I know what I would like, so I'm going to risk all my time and money making that, and hopefully the market will like it too. The other side, the other way to approach that is, what does the market like? What is the market hungry for, and make it for them.
Yes.
And one is obviously going to sell probably a lot better, and there's other people who bang their heads against the wall because the market doesn't like what they made. So I'm curious, like, what is your approach? I'm guessing you agree with that latter, and how you approach your creator-owned comics, because at the end of the day, it's not Batman, it's not Superman, it's your thing.
Yeah. I think what you're talking to me, and I'm going to put it in oversimplified terms, and feel free to just completely tell me I'm wrong. I see what you just said as, do you want to be a trend maker or a trend follower? And so if you're making art, regardless of whether you think somebody else is doing it or not, you're making art based on what you want to see on the table versus following other people's trends. Like, everybody in this world can probably do a really cool Batman print and sell it. Is that going to differentiate you in a con in any way, shape, or form? No. Like, everybody's got a Batman print on their table. You know, like, everybody kind of falls into that. They're following the trend. Versus, I'm going to create a character of my own, and I have to make it interesting enough so that people will spend their money on my new unique creation versus paying money for Batman.
That's I think for people who are hungry for different content and new and original content, I think that's a good place to be in, because at the end of the day, somebody might be tired of reading Batman and want to read that cool new thing that Doug just made.
Yeah. And so when we're going, you asked me about my approach is always like, I always try to do something that I think is original, that you can't pick up anywhere else. I can't compete with 75 years of Batman. I'm not going to come up with another character whose parents were shot, who's now a billionaire and runs around fighting crime. Like, for me to do that, I don't think, whether I think I'm good enough or not is almost, not important to me. It's like, I don't want to try to compete with Batman. He has 75 years ahead of me. Like, so I'm going to try to come up with something that's different. And that's what I like, though. Like, I mean, I still read a lot of superhero comics, but honestly, when I'm in the comic shop, what I'm really looking for is something new and unique that I haven't seen before. That's what draws my eye. And so that's what I'm trying to create.
I think that's a great way to look at it. I think it's an important way to look at it, frankly. And I think that, actually, speaking of creator-owned comics, I know you've worked with 12 Gauge, you've worked with Image. Is there a reason or a master plan or just a thought process behind which publisher you go with, or is it just you make a pitch to every single publisher who you think a pitch might be appropriate for, and then if they accept it, great, and if they don't, that's fine. But I'm curious how the whole pitch and submission process, how you approach it on a publisher by publisher basis.
Yeah, I don't know if this is smart or not. I'll admit that right out of the gate.
Okay.
I tend to put projects together and I'm going to do the project regardless. So, we kind of talked about like, are you willing to invest 20 grand in this book? I start out with that in mind. So like, and then there's a multi-tier plan after that. So like once I get deep into the book, probably issue 1 or 2, once I've got enough to like show somebody, I start thinking, okay, who do I think is the ideal publisher for this? Now you have to start thinking about, is it a comic book publisher or is it Simon and Schuster? Do I want to do it as floppy comics, just your individual monthly issues, or do I want to go straight to trade? And or does this work better as a Kickstarter nowadays? So now you've got this multi-tiered thing you have to kind of take into account and go, what will work best for this book, for this project? Because you can look at comic book shops and see what sells well and what doesn't. So like, do I think something like Yumi would have done as well on the stands as it's doing on Kickstarter? I personally didn't think so. I thought it was going to do better on Kickstarter than going through a traditional publisher. So you have to kind of, put that all together and figure out what path you want to walk first. And then you start, okay, Image, Dark Horse, Boom, IDW, Action Lab, where do I want to rank these people and who are doing books well in the same genre that I'm working in? Because if you look at it, like Boom's been having incredible success with some new books lately, and a lot of them are like supernatural in origin. And so like, okay, well, if I'm doing a supernatural book, maybe Boom's my best fit. Okay, Action Lab does a lot of action books, and they've been doing a lot of books well. Maybe I need to go to them. Well, what about Scout and Vault? So you got to kind of like figure out like what's going to fit your book best. Make that list in the order that you think it's going to work for your book best, and then start pitching. And you can't take any of it personal. I know that first day when you get that rejection, it's going to hurt. It always does, no matter what level I think in your career you're at. And you go, okay, I'm going to pitch this Image first. And then Eric Stevenson sends you an email and he says, nope, not interested. Okay. Boom's my next go-to. Okay. Then you get a email from Ross Ritchie and he's like, nope, sorry, this book's not for us. And you just keep going down that list until okay, well, maybe you've exhausted that list and you go, okay, well, this isn't working out. Do I want to crowdfund it or do I want to try to pitch it to somebody like Penguin or Simon Schuster or HarperCollins? So yeah, it's just like, I don't plan too far ahead because I don't want to I find that it can make you discouraged. So I make my list and I'm like, here's my top 3. And I worry about who's number 4 when number 3 sends me a rejection. And then I make another list and then I start questioning and then I'm like, okay, well, wait a minute, maybe I'm going about this wrong. So it's an ever evolving process. And I think if the pandemic should have taught anybody anything, we have to continually be evolving because it's really cool what I've seen in the comic book industry and Kickstarter, how the pandemic kind of forced an evolution and all of that almost overnight.
Isn't that the truth?
As a creative, you have to evolve constantly. Your game plan can't be 5 years from now, I'm going to be writing X-Men for Marvel. Well, what if X-Men is no longer being published by Marvel in 5 years? Your plan is shot. It's like, so you have to like really, really be flexible in every approach you take when it comes to the pitching process.
That makes sense. I respect what you said there a little bit ago. You're going to do the project no matter what. Just talking to the viewer at home, I did an interview with Dave Dwonch of Action Lab. And he told me the same thing. He says, you know what, I believe in my projects so strongly that even if they don't get, even if a publisher is not interested in them, I'm still going to go forward with them. Now I'm curious when it comes to the whole rejection letter, and I'm sure there's people watching who've gotten some rejection letters. And this is just a matter of fact, but you are somebody who is established. So you have an established track record, whereas brand new guy, what do they have to bring to the table for one of those publishers you mentioned to actually say yes? But besides the art, let's say the art and the story are there. If the art and the story are there, does that automatically, and assuming that the publisher is interested in such, you put all those 3 things together, it should be a yes, correct? Or am I wrong?
No, you're right. Trust me, it seems very cutthroat, and I realize that, and sometimes I can even see it that way when I know deep down I'm wrong. Every editor and every publisher is hoping that every time they open up an email or a pitch packet or they talk to you on the phone, that you give them the next greatest thing. That's what they're looking for. So if you have all those things checked off, if you have the fantastic art, you put together a beautiful pitch, the writing and the story are fantastic, they're going to pick it up. You're right. Now, you got to keep in mind, like we talked about even at the beginning of this, podcast, we can probably argue about a Star Wars movie. I'm not going to pick on any certain one of them, but there's, you might love one Star Wars movie and I hate one Star Wars movie. That doesn't mean it was either one of us are right or wrong. And so you have all the things checked off. Perfect story, perfect art, pitch is beautiful. And you show it to an editor and they go, this just isn't for me. And that's fair. I mean, it's just not their thing. So you move on to the next one.
But that's very, that comes down to individual taste. You would think it would be nice. I know committees are not paragons of efficiency, but having a committee almost say, yes, this is the thing we want to go with, I think would be a better than just one person can reject it. I don't know. It's
yeah. Well, let me ask you this: if you're on that committee and you're the one person that didn't like the story, but they assign you to be the editor on the book, don't you think that's going to hurt the book?
You know what? I didn't think of it like that.
Yeah.
If you're right, if you're the editor of it, and you should be the champion of it at the same time.
Yeah.
Somebody sends me a pitch, and I would, you're right. If somebody sends me a pitch that it's great, but it just doesn't feel right for me, then I'm going to do this service by failing to be a champion for that book and that creator team.
Right.
I can appreciate that.
And it's important for young creatives to understand that sometimes you have to look at it through the other lens. You have to look at it through the editorial lens or the publishing lens and realize that they're just trying to keep their job as well. They just want to make money, just like everybody else. We're all on the same playing field. And it might seem like them, man, they just don't like my stuff. It's like, no, they don't think they can sell it. And that's fair. I know it always hurts, but it's fair. It's like if you're talking to somebody and they're like, this just isn't my thing. I don't think I can move this book. And you don't want them. I mean, with Plastic, which I'll say is probably my most successful book to date, it still makes me money, which is incredible. I can't believe how well that's been received.
Wow.
It was turned down by a company initially, and they were like, no, we wouldn't touch this book with a 10-foot pole. And at first it hurts because you're like, well, man, maybe I made a mistake, putting money into this book. But then Image picked it up, and you're like, oh, this is fantastic. It ended up being the right fit at the right time. And, you just got to, go through those motions and not take any of that stuff too much to heart.
I can appreciate that. Sorry, I'm laughing because of the nature of the book.
Yep.
So I'm curious, what is next for Doug? What do you foresee in your future? Do you want to keep banging out a graphic novel or a series every once in a while? Actually, I'm curious about the graphic novel thing versus a mini series. I'm curious what you have to say about that. I know OGN's original graphic novels for you folks at home are a thing. Actually, why don't we talk about that for a minute? What attracts you to pitch a 3-issue miniseries versus just going on to Kickstarter and just getting it funded on there? Or if I'm going to do 12 issues and I have that in my mind, why don't I just pitch a whole graphic novel? What is the thought process and the pros and cons of that in your mind?
I think you nailed it. Like, right, even just in your question, you're like, it comes down to like, what do I think is going to fit the story the best? And so sometimes I think a story is better delivered in a graphic novel because if you're going to sit down with a graphic novel, you're going to read a story all in pretty much one sitting. And sometimes when you have a slow beginning, or like the story doesn't really get ramped up until, say, the midpoint, it might be delivered better as a graphic novel because people are going to, people have already invested their money in that book. They're going to read it through the end, so they'll keep reading. When you're talking about individual issues, do you have cool enough kind of plot turns and twists to have a 6-issue miniseries, so that there's a plot twist at the end of every issue. Those kind of things. So you have to kind of take into consideration what you think is going to best serve the story. It's kind of hard to gauge, because obviously if your comic book comes out as individual issues and the first 2 issues fall flat, then the other 4 issues of your 6-issue miniseries just aren't going to sell well. So that's going to end up costing you more money. Versus, would you have done better putting it as a graphic novel? Individual issues, they come out, they sell that month, and they're done. A graphic novel, you'll be selling a graphic novel 5-10 years from now. So now you've got to start, basing your, comics are kind of like the quick game. If the first issue sells well, you make money. Graphic novels, they're going to take a year to make their money back, typically, not always, obviously. But it might take 6 months to a year before they actually break even, and then you start making money. So you've got to take all that, just more variables for our equations, right? Of like trying to figure out the best way to deliver this. And it comes down to like, what do you think is going to best serve the story? Like, do you want people to sit down and read it all in one sitting? Or do you want a month in between each issue of your story?
Well, speaking of Yumi, that you decided to go the graphic novel route.
Yes. Yep. I think Yumi reads better as a graphic novel than it does individual issues. I think if once you get into the story, because with this one, it's so fast paced, especially once it gets going. I think that month in between might take away from the fast paced feel of the story. Like you're purposely putting in a 1 month break in between. So I felt like it served this story better to have it. You sit down and read it all at once. Like if you can do it in one read, like here you go, sit down. You get the fast paced, almost ADHD version of Yumi, like as quick as you can get it. And so I think having a month break between 3 of the 4 issues would have been a disservice to the story.
I can appreciate that. It's really beautiful. I'm excited to back it and get it. So you just the free preview, which I'll put in the link below, is pretty cool. So I'm excited for the readers. So I'm just curious, speaking of, our readers and our listeners, especially if they're just starting out, I have an idea of what, a brand new writer could be doing with themselves. And maybe I could just show it to you, tell you, and then you could tell me what you think. So if you're a brand new writer and you have no money, you're working at Costco, or you said Publix, right? You're working at Publix and you figured out how to tell a story and now you want to self-publish. Maybe would it be better to say, try to get published first? Maybe go into an anthology, try to get submitted to an anthology. You write, 6, 8, 12, whatever pages, try to get into there. Then you find a very small press publisher and you try to pitch a story. But at that point, in order to get into that small press publisher, you need to have a team. You need to have an artist and other people. And at that point, probably you need to make sure you're in a place financially where you can afford that and not get yourself into credit card debt.
No,
that's our advice to the viewers at home. Please do not get yourself into credit card debt. At that point, that's when it becomes getting serious. And if you are fortunate enough to be able to do all the work yourself, if you are a trained and talented artist, it might behoove you to just do all the work yourself. And I'm curious, again, we're talking about the benefits of, which publisher and which route to take OGN. Should I, if I think, do you think, if I have something which I think could be great 5 issues, why should I kickstart it or should I try to pitch it? I'm not sure how to make that decision.
Yeah, and I mean, here's the scarier thing about that is I'm not sure there's a right or wrong decision. So it's just a decision. So do you want to pitch it first and see if somebody like Image or Action Lab or Boom or Scout will pick it up, or do you want to just go straight to Kickstarter? I mean, there's you kind of have to go with what your gut tells you, and there's not really an equation there to because like I said, there's not a right or wrong decision there. There's just a decision. and you're not going to know if it's right or wrong until you do it. So, there's no easy way to figure that one out, I don't think.
Well, let me ask you. So on the publisher side, you have the pros would be now you are published. You now have a vetted brand telling everybody we've chosen this writer, we've chosen this creative team, and that sort of sets you apart. You now have a gold star on your chest, right?
Yep.
The downside of that is they're taking how much of your money? Half.
Oh yeah.
Half
Yeah.
your
I
money.
mean, depending on who you're with. Yeah.
On the other side of it, you can kickstart it, and the good news is you're going to keep all the money minus the 10% Kickstarter fee or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But the bad news is that you're sort of doing it on your own merit. And which would you prefer? And that comes down to personal choice.
Yeah.
You have the benefit of experiencing both.
Yeah.
Funny enough, Dave Dwonch's interview, link in the description below. He said that that's what some writers do. They'll try to get that DC or Marvel credit and then go back to doing their own thing just because it gives them that gold star on their chest that they need. So I mean that could be somebody's path too.
Yeah. There's you and I kind of talked a little bit about this during the email exchange. Like nobody ever does this the same way twice.
Yeah.
There's people that are making really good livings publishing their comics just on Kickstarter with say 300 to 500 people backing their Kickstarter every time.
Yeah, it's true.
If you sold 500 copies of a comic book at a comic book store, I'm talking about all comic book stores. Like if you get picked up by Action Lab and you only sell 500 copies, that's a horrible thing. you have lost everybody involved money. And so, I mean, there's just different paths to take here. And it just really gets down to like you said, it's really a personal choice. And there's so many paths to getting to where you want. It's honestly impossible to like dictate that. You kind of have to ride that wave and see where it takes you. So like, if you get picked up a Marvel and DC, yes, that's always going to be a feather in your cap. That's really, really tough without having published work first. So, I mean, Marvel and DC have hired people from mostly indie books.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, Brian Michael Bendis wrote indie books first.
Really?
Scott Snyder wrote prose first. He got picked up at a bookstore. It's like he didn't start out writing, Batman out of the gate. Matt Fraction, indie books. So you start looking at all these, big name writers that are in comics now. Kelly Sue DeConnick, Matt Fraction, Brian Michael Bendis, Scott Snyder, Tom King. All these people started writing. They just did it. They did their books first. They got discovered by doing their work.
Wow, that's very encouraging.
Oh yeah,
that's very encouraging. Wow. Hey, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you have a hard stop coming up in a little bit, but I just wanted to. Did you have any last advice? So go back to 17-year-old Doug.
Right.
17-year-old Doug is watching this. What would you say to him to give him encouragement for the journey ahead?
I would tell him to just start making comics. Don't wait for anybody to give you permission. Don't worry about how you're going to sell them or any of that kind of stuff. At that point, your best friend is Cully Hamner, who can draw comics. You two should just be making comics as much as you can. You should be writing and creating as many comics as you can, even if they're, those little ash cans that people pick up. Now you've got the internet. You could be doing a web comic. Just make books. It's that simple. I know it sounds crazy, but like you can just make books. You can just write stories and publish them yourself online or give them out for free as ash cans. The more you write and the more you create, the faster you'll get to your dreams.
And there you have it, folks. And I couldn't ask for a better answer. Doug, Thank you very much for your time. You've been most generous. I wasn't I'll just say it. I wasn't expecting somebody as accomplished as you to come onto a little channel like mine. And believe me, I appreciate it. And I know our audience appreciates it for all the gems you've just given us today. You've been incredible. I want to wish you much success with Yumi. I know that there are only a few more days to go, and I'm going to say something before and end, when I post this on YouTube, but it hit its goal and it surpassed its goal and it looks beautiful. And, I wish you very much luck with not only Yumi, but also that thing that's coming out with Image that you're not supposed to tell me, which I'm curious. I hope you email me later and tell me what it was.
If you'd like, we'll get back on and talk about that once we announce it. So.
That would be great. That would be great. Well, we'll stay in touch. Doug, thank you very much for your time. You have been a most excellent guest. I could not have asked for a better guest. And thank you very much for everything you've said here. I know our listeners appreciate it.
That's my pleasure, dude. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you very much, Doug. Have a great night, and I'm going to back this campaign shortly.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Doug. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
And there you have it. I hope you learned a lot about how to break into the comic book industry as a writer. Thank you again to Doug Wagner for taking the time to do this interview. If you viewers would like to learn more about Doug and his campaign, then the link to his Kickstarter is in the description below. If you found this video helpful and you'd like me to keep making more, then please convey that to both me and the YouTube algorithm by hitting like, subscribe, and the bell icon for notifications. If you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions for future videos, please let me know in the comment section down below. I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.